I teased it, and now we're gonna do it. Let's talk about the A7R5 and my last year with this amazing camera. So if you're watching this video, you likely already know that the Sony A7RV is the megapixel master. This is a 61 megapixel camera that gives you a ton of flexibility in post. It comes with amazing autofocus, including Sony's new AI autofocus chip, and a host of other things that you can see right over here. But you don't want me to sit and read a spec sheet to you. Let's get the actual impressions I've had using this camera over the last year and what it has done for my photography and videography. Let's start with the pros. If you thought that having a flippy screen was fantastic, and you also really liked the tilty screen, you are going to love the option to have both of them. I won't lie to you and tell you that I didn't partially buy this camera specifically for this screen setup. There have been so many times where either the flip out or flippy screen has given me some sort of a challenge. So Sony went, well, we've seen others like Panasonic do this. Let's do the best of the best and put both of them together. And it is excellent. Sony, please put this on every camera you produce. Don't cut corners. If anything could differentiate your cameras in the market, it would be putting this level of a screen on the back. I realize that's probably not gonna be possible, but it never hurts to ask. Beyond the screen, the EVF is fantastic. I do have a gripe with it we'll get to in the cons, but the EVF overall has been wonderful. Excellent resolution, far, far better than the old A7C that I had been working on, and it's far better than the A7CR, which I'm using here as a B cam today. This thing gives me excellent clarity, and it really allows me to use manual focus in a way that I've really felt is a bit lacking on the mirrorless system. I was so used to doing this on a DSLR, I could tell right away where my point of focus was. And I feel like I just don't get that through the screen. And when the EVF is not up to snuff, I just don't feel like I get that through the EVF either. And I find myself fighting with it to get the manual focus that I want. This has largely gotten rid of all of those qualms. We have to talk about the resolution. I have never owned a camera with this many megapixels. And one of the things that that does for my photography is allows me to shoot wider and crop. And sure, you can do that when you have something like a 26 or 33 megapixel camera like the A7C or the A7 IV, but there is something amazing about this level of clarity and being able to punch in just that bit extra. And I will say, I'm not sure that I could move to a camera that didn't offer me the chance to use an APS-C crop in the way that this does. I so frequently will use that to punch in and just get like an instant 1.5 teleconverter on any lens that I'm using by just cropping in. And additionally, for something that I really have to nail the autofocus on, but the autofocus points don't cover 100% of the sensor. When you put it in APS-C crop mode, they do cover that. And it is really sticky once you've got it into that mode. So anything that's moving fast, it's a great way to be able to help be sure that your focus is going to be on target every single time. Focus bracketing has also been a breeze. It's very easy to set up once you know what you're doing. There's a great video, I believe it's from Mark Gaylor, that I will put up here, Pachow, that walks through all of the different focus bracketing options that you have. And I thought it was a very easy tutorial. Once I went through that, I was much more easily able to handle all the bracketing modes. Of course, the autofocus on this, having the AI chip, put that in the Pro column. There have only been 2 times in the entirety of the time I've had this camera where it has let me down. It has let me down. And I was furious about one of them. And you know what? It's probably my own fault. I was using high plus burst in a portrait shoot. My model was doing everything that I had asked. And we were doing a twirling shot where we were going to have the dress come out and remain in focus on the face with the dress sort of expanding outward and catching that in motion. Nailed the shot. I was even looking in the EVF for this and thought, got the focus, nailed it. But I didn't. It's the one time in the entirety of portrait shooting that it has let me down. And I was livid because it was the shot of the night. We did it twice even to make sure we had it. This may be partially because I was using continuous autofocus and not tracking autofocus. We're gonna try it again, and I will update this to let you know. But I would caution anybody to be aware, if you plan to use this for sports, if you plan to use this for wildlife, this camera is designed for high resolution, not necessarily for the fastest performance around capturing those types of scenarios. That's what the A9 III is really built for, is capturing wildlife and sports, anything where you're going to need that global shutter, which I kind of want. Okay, I just want it. I don't need it. I don't need it, but I want it. And there was one other time where this really fell apart for me, and that was when I was at youth sports. My son had a soccer game. I was out there using it to get video and get photo of him and his teammates. And there were just a number of scenarios where it couldn't maintain, with that many faces around, just couldn't hold on to whoever the subject was that I was tracking, even when I put it in tracking mode. So that's a very challenging situation. I don't blame Sony for that at all. I don't think any other system would have done any better of maintaining that tracking focus than what I have here. And to be honest with you, that was a handful of shots in a very difficult lighting scenario, a very difficult number of subject scenario. I think that's a one-off. Outside of that, I cannot imagine a better autofocus system. It's nailed it every time. Right on the eye, the AI chip, finding and remaining focus on your subject even when they've turned around, it works perfectly. And I tested the face detection, where you can take a photo of a face and it will primarily focus on that even in a crowd. You can get kind of that Dustin Hoffman look in Midnight Cowboy. That works flawlessly. So if you absolutely need to have tracking, if you are shooting a wedding and you want to make sure the bride is always the point of focus, this is for you. You can take one photo and I assure you it will hang on to it. What do I wish I would see from this? I would love to see it to where you could have multiple faces and it would go through the order of precedence that you set up within the camera. And if it didn't find face number 1, it would go to face 2. And if it didn't find face 2, it would go to face 3. I realize that's asking a lot. I'm not really going to cover the button layout of this because I came from an A7C, which obviously being a compact camera like the A7CR that I have over here is just going to have a different layout that's more compact. The amount of customization that you can put on this, I can't imagine what else you would need. I think it has all of the flexibility that I would want. I love being able to customize the rotary dial that's on top. That's originally the exposure compensation dial. I've actually got that set to my ISO. So I have 3 actual physical controls that I use for shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. And it has been wonderful to work with. The only thing that does intrigue me is I now have seen the A9 III. And the body on that looks really comfortable. I'm gonna give it a try at my local camera store, and I'll let you know if it seems to be an improvement over the ergonomics of the camera here. I love the full camera compared to the compact one. However, the A7CR with the additional extension. Now I know you don't get this with the A7C, you gotta get the R version of it. With the extender on it, I actually really like the ergonomics of the A7CR. It is a night and day difference from the original A7C and probably the A7C too. I'll do a full review on the A7CR later so you can get some more of my sense of that after I take it out a few more times. It's my wife's camera. I just borrow it to do these, but I will run it out and actually get some field time with it and see how it goes. So the video performance is excellent in 4K. Obviously, if you get down to 1080, the video performance is even better. I have never one time, not once, no matter where I've been, no matter what my conditions, have I had this overheat. If you are concerned about overheating, if you are using it in anywhere kind of the scenarios that I am, I'm not going massive sweltering heat in the desert, I'm not going to Antarctica, I'm staying away from the extremes, but if you're in normal use cases, this thing's perfectly fine. And I will say, hot tip, if you don't already know this, with that screen, pull it away from the body and you'll get better heat dissipation. Sometimes I forget to do that, still works fine. There have been some complainers on the internet that have said, oh, the rolling shutter makes this basically useless when you're shooting in 8K. And you know what? They're right. 8K, I've shot on it 1 or 2 times. I did it in these locked off shots. And even just this, it doesn't track it particularly well. I think 8K is sort of a gimmick in this camera, and quite frankly, for what I use it for, you're looking at it. I don't need 8K. I can shoot in 4K, and this is perfectly fine. It gives me everything that I need. But I will say the 10-bit color that is in this was a massive leap forward from the A7C that I came from. The amount of flexibility that you have to grade this after the fact, I don't even do that much grading, but I can see the difference between the 8-bit footage and the 10-bit footage. The amount of color information that comes through, it's so clear when you're editing it. And I use an M3 Max MacBook Pro for editing, and I can edit in 4K on a 4K timeline flawlessly. This thing is a monster. We'll talk about that some other time, but this footage is very easy to work with. And if you are used to working in the 8-bit space, I cannot recommend enough. Move into 10-bit if you're starting to see that maybe like outside, you're trying to pull the sky back and you're running into problems. You're trying to get some of that shadow information and you're running into problems where the color is falling apart for you. And you can only push it so far before it just completely degrades. If you're in a studio situation like this probably doesn't make nearly as big of a difference. But as soon as you start getting out there and trying to do anything outside, the less controlled the scenario, the better the flexibility of 10-bit is. Let's cover something that I think might go in the con category for many of you, and that is the file size that you get with 61 megapixels. These are enormous files, and you have got to have the right cards to be able to manage it. If you're somebody that doesn't want any blackouts when you're shooting, you're going to sit and wait for a buffer for a very long time. If you are rocking a V30 card, get at least to V60 to be able to have a reasonable buffer clear time. I would recommend moving all the way up to V90 cards for your SDs. I ran V90s in these, no major issues. However, if you shoot anything in burst, that is where you might start to see some benefit. When I started doing portrait shoots, that is where I immediately said, I have to go out and I need to get the CF Express Type A's because I bought this camera for resolution. I'm not gonna compress RAW. I'm sure that people are going, well, that's stupid. Why wouldn't you just do compressed RAW? I want all of the detail. If I didn't want all of the detail, I wouldn't have bought this camera. And I think you should really consider, even at the cost, which is preposterously expensive, I would highly consider that you actually get at least one of them. I got two, and my wallet has never forgiven me. I put those in here. I don't even think about the buffer anymore. I don't even know that the buffer exists. That's how fast it clears. Remember, SD cards fail. They just do. It happens. So if you're in one of those situations where you're struggling to get this, you can always upgrade later. Start where you are, stay within your budget. My biggest cons, I've already gone through a couple of them with the EVF and really being able to see where the manual focus is. There is a quirk that exists with this camera you need to know about. That EVF in some cases is completely squandered because Sony has done something honestly stupid. And Sony, if you are watching this, you need to fix this. When you are running a continuous autofocus or running a back button focus, or you're just holding focus and using continuous focus with this camera, there are scenarios where it is going to completely destroy the EVF image. I don't know why this happens. It just degrades the quality of the image. I have to assume that there's a overall maximum amount of processing power that this thing has, and while it's using that functionality, it just can't push the EVF hard enough, can't keep the image up. It's not acceptable. It's the one biggest gripe that I have with this camera. I mean, why don't you just put the same one that's over here on the A7CR in it if it's not going to be able to keep up? I use that focus all the time. If you're a manual focus, this doesn't even apply to you. Just go ahead and buy the camera. But if you are somebody that uses that focus and use it all the time, that's something to note. There's an anti-flicker setting that you can go and turn off. That helped immensely, but it doesn't fix it entirely. So another con for me, and this is just coming from the compact version of this, is just the weight. It weighs a little bit more. Is it so much that I care? No. This camera is worth it. However, I can't say that at the end of the day, I don't go, man, when I got done with my first portrait shoot with this, doing a lot of holding the camera vertically, boy, oh boy, was my arm tired. I was like, maybe I need to think about a vertical grip if I'm gonna do this much work. Another con for me, there's a lot of functionality in this camera that I just haven't touched yet. And I have to navigate around that stuff all the time. Things that I'm sure that I will find the right scenario for this, but there's just a ton of stuff in this camera. I run everything almost on full manual pretty much constantly. So some of the automated things that I see in there, exposure compensation, for example. I don't really use exposure compensation very often because I run everything on manual. And when I'm doing video, for the most part, it's in the studio right here. And I just set it and forget it. I've got it set to my custom buttons 1 on this camera, and don't tell my wife, I actually set custom button 1 on this camera to do exactly what I want and be the exact settings I need right here. Any barrier that I had out of the way, and just gets me to be able to make these videos faster. Coming from the older Sony menu system, I don't know why people complained about moving from one to the other. This is way better. If you're on the old system and you're like, I don't know if it's gonna be better. If you've got muscle memory built up, I have a photographer friend of mine back in Colorado who I think moving from current system to new system, she would struggle with some of that because she has taken 50,000 pictures with that exact setup, to the point where you don't have to look at anything anymore. And I'm getting to that point with this camera. But even after a year, there are still times where I go, oh, that's not the right button. I need this one while I'm in the EVF. I don't have it on rails yet, but I'm getting there, very close. One of the other cons that I have, and it hasn't hindered me to any great degree, but it's something that I wish was here. Take the 8K recording out and give me 4K 120. I just wanted to be able to get some nice, smooth slow-mo. I've got to kick down to 1080 or rock 4K 60 here, which is fine, and that's what I've been doing. In summary, would I buy this camera again? Absolutely. Am I selling this camera and going to get an A9 III or an A1 II? No, not even remotely. This camera's incredible. If you're thinking about getting one, just go buy it. Know those limitations. If you are somebody that's like, I have to have every single possible microsecond, I need that full global shutter, I can't have any rolling shutter performance, you know to get an A9 III. Can't afford it? You can choose this, or you can choose the A7 IV in Sony's lineup. For a lot of people, I think the A7 IV is probably the go-to here, but I would caution anybody on buying an A7 IV because apparently within a few months here in 2025, it looks like if the rumors are true, we might get an A7 V. So I would hold off on that one if you're planning on buying. But right now, holiday season, the A7R V is $400 off or something like that. I think they're running it at $33.99 if I'm not mistaken. If you're somebody that just wants the absolute pinnacle of performance, the absolute best there is, I gotta say, as much as the Sony A1 II was a bit of a disappointment update for other people, I cannot imagine anybody would pick that up and say, it doesn't do the thing I need. If you want the best of the best, just go buy the A1 II. That does also come with a dramatic price tag. This means that after doing my research and spending a year with this camera that I thought, this is the one for me, I think unless I upgrade to a Sony A1 II, this is the camera for me. Let me know what you think. Are you gonna get an A7R V? Are you thinking about waiting until the next big Sony release and who knows what they're gonna add to cameras? Or are you looking more towards an A7 IV? Or maybe one of the big dogs, the A9 III or the A1 II. Let me know in the comments. At the end of the day, what matters here are the results. And these images are exactly why I purchased this camera. This is the best image that I have taken this year, and it might be one of the best that I've taken in my entire life. I traveled all the way to New York City to capture this. This is Manhattanhenge. This is a once-a-year astronomical event where the sun sets between the buildings in New York. I sat on this bridge for hours with hundreds of other photographers for just a chance to capture this. I hurt my back and took months to recover from it, from holding this out and leaning for an hour just to get this shot. I'm printing this, I'm matting it, and I'm putting it on the wall. This is why I bought this camera. If you want to capture images like this, get yourself an A7R5. If you want to learn a little bit about Epidemic Sound's new plugin for DaVinci Resolve and how it can make your music editing faster, click this one right here. I'll see you in the next one.